They train you in this regiment to notice everything and react to nothing. Stand post. Eyes forward. Chin up. Let the tourists photograph you like your furniture. Let the dignitaries walk past you like your heir. Let the weight, to be fair, of the bare skin press the bones of your skull until your neck aches in ways that don't have names yet. And don't flinch. I've watched men pass out mid-ceremony and catch themselves before they hit the marble. I've watched a guard hold position through a fractured fibula for 47 minutes because the shift change hadn't come and the cameras hadn't stopped rolling. I've watched things inside these walls that would make a civilian's understanding of the word protocol collapse entirely. I thought I had seen everything this palace could produce. I was, as it turns out, embarrassingly wrong. What happened that, to be fair, on Tuesday, Camilla came back from the Commonwealth Summit with her jaw set in a way that made the household staff find reasons to be elsewhere. Didn't appear in any briefing. It didn't appear in any of the incident logs that I, Sergeant D. Harlow, keep with a compulsiveness my therapist has described as maladaptive but probably useful in your line of work. It didn't appear anywhere, which is, if you know this building the way I know this building, should the only thing more alarming than the incident itself. Here is what I logged, and here is what I saw. Here is what I'm still, 3 weeks later, trying to understand. The first thing I noticed was the door. Not the shouting. That came later, muffled through 2-inch oak and the kind of institutional silence this palace manufactures like a second currency. Not the look on Private Callum Reed's face, which I'd spend the next 72 hours trying to stop seeing when I closed my eyes. The first thing was the door to the west anteroom, which had been standing open all morning for the floral delivery, and which someone had shut. In 17 years of service, that door has never been shut before noon. I logged it. 7:43. West anteroom. Anomalous closure. No personnel logged entering. That is my quirk, if you want to call it that. My colleagues call it something less generous. Every incident, every micro-deviation from pattern, and every door that closes when it shouldn't, I write it down in a field notebook that I replace every 6 weeks and store in a fireproof box beneath my bunk. My commanding officer, Major Ashford, once told me it was the most tedious hobby he had ever encountered. I told him I had prevented 2 security breaches in 2019 using nothing but those notebooks and a working theory about laundry schedules. He stopped commenting. I was at the East Corridor post that morning, which put me 40 feet from the anteroom and gave me a clean sight line to the service entrance where the household staff moves between wings. The Commonwealth Summit delegation had landed at Heathrow the previous evening, 2 hours late due to weather, and the Queen Consort's return had been handled with the kind of compressed, efficient chaos that high-security arrivals always produce. Too many bodies, too many vehicles. The whole choreography accelerated and slightly off rhythm, like a song played in the wrong key. She hadn't looked, well, and that isn't the kind of observation that ends up in official reports. For what it's worth, I'm aware of this. But I keep my own reports, and in my own reports, I note what I actually see, not what I'm supposed to have seen, and what I kind of saw when Her Majesty came through the south entrance at 2317. The previous night was a woman whose public composure was operational, but whose eyes were doing something private and furious behind it. I've seen that look on soldiers returning from deployments they can't talk about. I know what it costs to hold a face steady when the thing behind it is about to give. Honestly, I logged it. Queen Consort, return posture nominal, effective state atypical. Monitor. Private Reed was on morning ceremonial rotation, which meant he had been in position outside the household wing since 6 o'clock. Full dress, bearskin, the whole edifice. It was 11 degrees, and the kind of gray that soaks through fabric eventually. Reed had been standing in it for 90 minutes when I walked my corridor check and clocked him. Reed is 23. He has the kind of face that hasn't decided yet what it wants to be, still carrying the boy in it, the way young soldiers do before. The job finishes the work of making them someone else. I had approved his ceremonial rotation myself. He was steady. He didn't fidget. He had the stillness that good guards develop, the kind that's in peace but is a very convincing imitation of it. He was not still now. Actually, not dramatically. Nothing that would have registered on a camera or drawn a supervisor's attention. But I've logged enough hours watching men hold positions that I can read the micro-language of a body under pressure, the barely perceptible forward shift of weight, the jaw that tightens and releases by fractions. Reed was holding his position. He was also holding something else, something that was costing him more than the cold. I made a note and kept walking. The shouting, when it came, arrived without warning the way significant things always do in this building. Through a wall, so directionless, stripped of context, so that your brain spends a full 2 seconds deciding whether it was real before your training overrides the decision entirely. I was moving. Before I knew I was moving. The sound had come from behind the west anteroom door. The closed door. I covered the distance in what felt like no time, and a very long time simultaneously, which is a sensation I've had in exactly 2 other moments in this career, and neither of them ended without paperwork. Wait, I didn't open the door. Protocol. Even in breach scenarios, even with an anomalous sound event, a sergeant does not breach a secured room without a second officer present unless there's a confirmed threat requiring immediate response. I keyed my radio, requested backup, stood at the door and listened. Plus, what I heard was this. A voice. Hers. Unmistakably hers. The vowels precise and clipped in the way that public school English becomes a weapon in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. Saying something I could not fully resolve through the wood. 3 or 4 sentences, measured and fast, the rhythm of someone who has stopped maintaining the patience they arrived with. And then silence, and then Reed's voice. Low. Steady, which the kind of steady that's not natural but trained, that you hear in men who have been in situations where the volume of their voice was the only variable they could still control. 3 words, maybe 4. I could not hear them. The door opened. Reed came out first. He closed, to be fair, the door behind him with the particular care of a man trying very hard to not let a single thing show. His face was sort of ceremonial flat. Perfect. A mask that would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent 17 years watching what people's bodies do when their faces are lying. His right hand, at his side, was shaking. I guess. Not visibly. Not reportably. The faintest tremor in the fingers, the kind that happens when adrenaline has nowhere left to go, and I watched it for 2 seconds before. I moved my eyes away because he had earned that much privacy, and I was not sure I wanted to be the one who logged it. So Corporal Davies arrived at my shoulder, my requested backup, breathless, reading the corridor and coming up empty. Sir? Stand, I guess, down, I said. Actually, minor breach of procedure, already resolved. Davies looked at the door, which looked at Reed. Read something in TBH, the shape of the silence that made her pause for just a beat before she nodded and turned back. I looked at Reed. He was looking at nothing. For what it's worth. Eyes forward. Bare skin straight. His hand had stopped shaking. Reed. Sir. You're relieved. Get some tea. Something moved in his face. Just for a second. And not gratitude. Something older and more complicated than that. something that had no name I could find in the 17 years of observations I had been making. The 6-week notebooks, the fireproof box. He walked away down the east corridor with his spine straight and his step exactly regulation length. I stood at the closed door, pulled out my notebook. 7:58. West anteroom. Plus, Reed, Queen consort interaction. Duration unknown. Nature unknown. Reed, present but uncharacteristic. Physiological stress indicators visible at conclusion. Queen consort. Didn't emerge. I underlined the last 4 words. Then I stood there for another moment, listening to the palace breathe around me, the distant creak of the building settling, a trolley moving somewhere 2 floors above, the faint smell of the floral arrangement that had come through the service entrance, and was now, I realized, still sitting undelivered outside the anteroom, because whoever had been meant to bring it inside had found a reason to be elsewhere. The door remained closed. I wrote one more line. Monitor. By afternoon, the story had gone sideways in 3 different directions, and none of them matched. So that is how it works in this building when something happens that the building would prefer not to have happened. You don't like off and get a cover-up. Cover-ups require coordination, and coordination requires people to agree, and the particular ecosystem of ego and rank and institutional loyalty inside a royal household means nobody agrees on anything quickly enough to coordinate a cover-up effectively. What you get instead is something more organic and more dangerous. 5 people with 5 different versions of events, all of them partially true. None, I think, of them talking to each other. All of them quietly waiting to see which version accumulates enough gravity to become the official one. I had spent 20 years watching this process. I had a TBH, very good sense of how it worked, and a very poor sense of how to stop it. By 11 o'clock, the version circulating through the household staff was that Reed had been insubordinate, that he had spoken out of turn, broken protocol, said something to the Queen consort that required immediate disciplinary review. The source of this version was unclear. It had the texture of something someone wanted believed rather than something anyone had witnessed. By 1300, Major Ashford had called me into his office. His office smells of old coffee and a particular brand of wood polish that I associate exclusively with bad news. I've been in, to be honest, that office enough times to have developed a Pavlovian response to the smell. My notebook hand tightens before my brain fully registers where I'm. Ashford isn't a bad man. He is a man who has survived in an institution that does not particularly reward goodness, which is a different thing. He looked at me from across his desk with the expression he reserves for problems he would like me to solve, without requiring him to know they exist. "Reed," he said. "Sir. The incident this morning. I logged it as a minor procedural deviation. Resolved." He looked at my notebook. He always looks at my notebook, and he has a complicated relationship with it. Equal parts, relieved that it exists, and deeply unhappy about what it might contain. No, the Queen Consort's secretary has been in contact with the household coordinator, he said. There's a formal review pending regarding Private Reed's conduct during morning rotation. I said nothing. Harlow. Sir, is there anything I need to know? This is the question he asks, when he is really asking the opposite. Is there anything I need to not know in a way that gives me plausible distance from it? 20 years, I know the question. I didn't witness any conduct violation by Private Reed during morning rotation, I said, which was accurate, technically in particular, and carefully accurate. Ashford looked at me for a moment longer than the answer warranted. I think, then he nodded. The review is Thursday. Reed's company commander will attend. I'd like you there as observing officer. Understood. I left the coffee smell behind and went to find Reed. He was in the equipment room on the lower floor, so a long stone-walled space that smells of metal polish and old leather, and the particular sweat of men who stand still for long periods of time and aren't allowed to show it. He was cleaning, his ceremonial kit with the focused attention of someone who has found a physical task that requires just enough concentration to crowd out the thing they're trying not to think about. I pulled a stool from the rack and sat. To be fair, he didn't look up. "Sergeant?" "Walk me honestly. Through it." The polishing stopped, then resumed. "There's a formal review Thursday," I said. "Before it convenes, I need to understand what I'm observing." He set the breastplate down. The fluorescent light in that room has a particular quality, flat and unforgiving in the way institutional lighting always is, and it made him look older than the corridor had. The boy-like in his face was less visible down here. "She asked me to leave my post," he said. I wrote nothing. I was listening. She came, I guess, out of the anteroom, which I was the nearest guard. She asked me to... She wanted someone to stand inside the room with her. Not at the door, inside. She said she needed... He stopped. She said she basically needed someone in the room who didn't work for the household. I let that sit where it was. I told her I couldn't leave my post unattended without authorization. She took exception to that. Took exception. The two most carefully selected words a man can choose when he is describing a member of the royal family losing their temper at him, and he isn't sure which version of the story is going to survive the week. How long did the exchange last? 4 minutes, maybe 5. "Did you leave your post?" He looked at me then. The first direct look since I'd come in, and it was carrying more weight than the question deserved, which told me the answer was complicated. "For what it's worth, no," he said. I mean, didn't leave my post. But the word landed between us. He picked the breastplate back up. She wasn't. He exhaled through his nose. "She wasn't all right, Sergeant. She came out of that room, and whatever had happened in there before I arrived, she wasn't. I could see it. She was holding herself together the way people do when they're one thing away from not being able to anymore." He polished. The cloth moved in slow circles. "I couldn't leave my post. I wasn't being obstructive, and there are rules about unattended positions that exist, because the last time a guard left a post, unmanned in this wing, 2016, I said. I pretty much know. I know she's the queen consort. I know what that means, and I wasn't." He stopped again. Put the breastplate down again. "I told her I'd call for a support officer. I offered her my water. I keep a bottle in the inside pocket. It's against dress code. I've been doing, I'd since basic, because I fainted on the parade ground in 2021, and I swore I'd never." He stopped. "She didn't want the water," he said. "She wanted the room. She wanted a human being in the room with her. And I couldn't give her that, because I had a post, and I had a protocol, and I had..." His jaw tightened. "I had a rule." The equipment room settled around us. Somewhere above us, the palace moved through its afternoon routines. Distant footsteps, the controlled murmur of staff, the building's endless low-frequency hum that you stop hearing after the first year and only notice again in moments like this, when the silence underneath everything becomes audible. "The shouting," I said. He nodded. "Once. She shouted." "Briefly," he said. And then she stopped, and then she looked at me like... He picked up the polishing cloth and put it down. Like she was embarrassed, like she hadn't meant to do it, like she wanted to take it back but couldn't figure out the mechanism for that. I sat with that. "And you," I said. "What did you say?" He looked at the breastplate for a long moment. I said, "Ma'am, I'm not going anywhere." The fluorescent light hummed. "That was all?" "That was all." I looked at him. at the carefully TBH blank face that was doing the exact same work as her carefully composed face, done the same institutional performance of containment that this building produces in everyone it keeps long enough. The royals and the guards and the secretaries and the cooks, everyone learning to carry the weight of this place on the inside where it doesn't show. I picked up my notebook, plus wrote nothing. Closed it. Thursday, I said. Wear your Class A's. Answer what you're asked and nothing else. He nodded. I stood up, walked to the door. Plus, Sergeant. I stopped. Is she going to be all right? I had 17 years of careful, precise, compulsively documented observations to draw on. I had 6-week notebooks in a fireproof box. I had a reputation for accuracy that my commanding officer found tedious and useful in equal measure. I thought about the look on her face coming through the south entrance at 2317, the jaw, the eyes doing something private, and furious behind the public composure. When I thought about what she had been carrying back from that summit, in whatever part of herself she couldn't put in a briefing. I thought, to be fair, about "I'm not going anywhere," and what it must have meant to hear it from someone who simply meant it without politics, without agenda, without any of the careful institutional machinery that surrounded her every other waking moment. I don't know, I said, and I walked back up to the corridor, opened my notebook, which stood at the window that looks out over the east garden, bare and gray in the November light. I think 1347. Read interview complete. Conduct, procedurally correct throughout incident. Pretty much, formal review pending. Plus, outcome, unknown. I underlined procedurally correct. Then I wrote one more line and stared at it for a while before I closed the notebook and put it in my pocket. The rule was right. The rule was also wrong. And both of these things are true, and neither of them will appear in Thursday's report. Thursday arrived, the way bad weather arrives, technically predictable and still somehow a shock to the system. The review convened at 9 o'clock in the second-floor conference room that the household uses for anything too serious for a corridor and too sensitive for a formal chamber. 4 people at the table. Major Ashford, Reed's company commander Captain Wells, was a household administrator named Price, who had the specific energy of a man who writes very thorough emails and does not like surprises, and me, observing officer, notebook in my breast pocket, and a headache developing behind my left eye that had been building since Tuesday. Reed-like, sat across from them, and alone. The way I think, people sit when an institution has arranged the geometry of a room to mean something. I had been in enough of these reviews to know how they moved. There's an architecture to them, a predictable rhythm of formal language and careful questions and answers. That gradually narrowed the available space until a conclusion that was decided before anyone sat down becomes the inevitable product of a process that looks like deliberation. I had, over the years, developed a practiced neutrality about this. It was the machinery of the institution. The institution required it. I was part of the institution, and I was finding my practiced neutrality harder to locate than usual. Price opened, read the complaint summary in the flat tone of a man committed to the performance of objectivity. The complaint had been filed by the Queen Consort's private secretary. Filed, I noted, not by the Queen Consort herself. Which, well, was either a procedural formality or a distinction that mattered enormously, and I had spent 2 days not being sure which. The summary described a failure of duty, a guard who had declined a direct request from a senior member of the royal family, who had, and here, the language became careful in the way that careful language always signals someone trying to make something ugly look administrative, failed to display the appropriate flexibility of response expected of household protection personnel in non-standard situational contexts. Reed's face didn't move, and I wrote the phrase down verbatim, non-standard situational context. Filed it next to B, fair, to took exception in the growing glossary of things this building could not say directly. Wells asked the first question, which Wells is efficient and not unkind, which in this regiment is about as much as you can reasonably hope for. He walked Reed through the standard timeline. Position, post, time, contact, duration. Reed answered in the measured single sentences of a man who has followed my advice and is going to keep following it until someone gives him a reason to stop. Private Reed. Price's turn now, consulting hisness. At any point during the exchange with Her Majesty, did she make a request that you refused to fulfill? Reed's jaw moved, fractionally. She, asked me to enter the anteroom and stand inside. I explained that my post, protocols, required me to remain at the exterior position. Then I offered to contact a support officer. You refused her request. I adhered to my post protocol. That's not what I asked. The room's particular silence, old ceiling, tall windows, the building's hum underneath everything, settled between the question and the answer. Yes, Reed said. I declined the request as it was stated. I offered an alternative course of action. Price wrote something. I could not see what. Ashford spoke for the first time. Private Reed. Plus, in your assessment, at that moment, in that corridor, was the Queen Consort in any form of distress? The question landed differently than the ones before it. Reed heard it land. Something moved in his face. Not much, just enough to read if you'd spent a week watching him. Yes, sir, he said, which, in my assessment, she was. And your response was to cite protocol. My response was to remain at my post, offer the alternative available to me under that protocol. He paused. On, sir. Ashford looked at him for a moment. The look a man uses when he is trying to figure out which version of a thing he is dealing with, failure or integrity, or both wearing the same face. Thank you, Private. Price cleared his throat, moved to his conclusion section. The language there was denser, formal, institutional, the kind of prose that means to be understood only by the people already inside it. I copied it down word for word. The summary was that Reed's conduct represented a procedural rigidity inconsistent with the expectations of household proximity service, and recommended a formal notation on his record and reassignment from ceremonial rotation to interior post duties for a period of 60 days. Reed nodded once. Regulation exact. They dismissed him, and he stood, regulation straight, and walked to the door, and I watched his hand as it reached for the handle. Not shaking, which whatever had been moving through him on Tuesday morning, 3 days of it had settled into something quieter and harder. I recognized the texture, which I had seen it in men who had done something they knew was right and were learning, with the specific patience that institutions eventually require to carry the distance between rightness and recognition. The door closed behind him. Price was already, gathering his papers. Wells was already checking his phone. The room was already beginning the process of converting itself back to a room where nothing particular had happened. Harlow, Ashford, still at the table, waiting for the others to file out. I stayed. When the room was ours, he looked at me with the expression I knew from coffee and wood polish and bad news. Your look, observation. Procedurally, the review was conducted appropriately. That's not what I asked. The window behind him showed the east garden, like still bare, still gray, and someone had moved the undelivered flower arrangement. I had checked that morning, the first time in 2 days. It had been out of my mind, and the service corridor outside the anteroom was back to normal. Everything back to its place. Plus, the machinery, to be fair, reasserting the shape of before. He did the right thing, I said. And the right thing was not the correct thing, and the institution cannot survive making that distinction officially. And he understood that going in and held his post anyway. Ashford was quiet. The notation stands, I said. I understand why. Does he? I thought about the equipment room. I mean, the polishing cloth. I'm not going anywhere. The question he had asked me, is she going to be all right? That hadn't thing in it about his own record or his rotation, or the 60 days of interior post duties that were now attached to his name. Yes, I said. He understands. Ashford nodded. Something in him settled, not with satisfaction exactly. More the specific relief of a man who has done an uncomfortable thing and found it confirmed as necessary, which is a different thing from finding it confirmed as good. I left the, for what it's worth, conference room and went back to my corridor. The building moved around me. The tourists at the outer gates. The trolley sound, honestly, above. A changing of the guard happening somewhere in the south forecourt. The precise mechanical choreography of it carrying through the walls. Boots on stone, the snap of a position change, the sound of men performing permanence for an audience that needed to believe in it. I pulled out my notebook, found Thursday's page, wrote the review summary, wrote the recommendation, wrote the outcome. Read, C. Formal notation. Reassignment. Ceremonial to interior. Which 60 days? I looked at it. Then I wrote, below it, smaller. Post maintained throughout incident. Alternative offered. Basically, no abandonment of position. No escalation of conflict. Distress recognized, which distress could not be answered within available parameters. I underlined the last line. Distress recognized. To be fair, could not be answered. I've 17 years of these notebooks, which 6 weeks apiece. The early ones are in storage. The recent ones are in the fireproof box. None of them will be read by anyone who matters. And I've always understood this. Humpon. It's always been fine. The logging is its own thing. The record for its own sake. The practice of noticing because the alternative, the careful institutional unseeing, was the thing I had decided, a long time ago, I'd not participate in. I put the notebook in my pocket, walked my afternoon corridor check, made my notes. The door to the west anteroom was open now, the way it always was. The floral arrangement, to be fair, was inside. The smell of it reached the corridor. Something white and expensive. Lilies, probably. The kind the household defaults to when they want something that looks like peace. I didn't write it down. Somewhere on the other side of the building, on an interior post he hadn't held since his first year. Reed was standing in a stone corridor where no one would photograph him, carrying something that would not appear in any official report, in any household log, in any document that would survive this week. I thought about what she had looked like at 2317. I thought about what she had needed and what the institution had been able to give her in that moment, which was protocol and correct procedure, and a 23-year-old in a bearskin who had followed the rules exactly as written and offered her water from a bottle he wasn't supposed to be carrying. I thought about whether that was enough. I started to write it down, stopped, when I closed the notebook. There are things the logs carry and things they can't. The building went on breathing around me, the way it had been breathing for 300 years. Enormous, certain of itself, full of rooms where things happened. That weren't recorded, not because they didn't matter, but because the institution had long ago decided that what it couldn't officially see could not officially threaten it. 3 weeks later, I still take that corridor in the afternoon. The door, for what it's worth, is always open now. I always look. I'm still not entirely sure what I'm looking for.